Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to thank and pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, Gavin. Thank you so much for joining us today in the studio.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we were just talking about how, after COVID, we've done so many virtual recordings, and this is your first one in person?
This is my first one in person. I've done a couple online through whatever platform they're using. But yes, this is my first one in person.
The chance to talk in person is always different. So we are excited and really glad that you could make it.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and because you're here today, we would love to know more about you, especially for our audience. Obviously, our team has done a lot of research on who you are and your work, but I would always love to let yourself introduce yourself to our audience, especially in the context of your life story so far, your professional background, and how you came to be here today, talking to us about work motivation in the context of well-being. So fire away.
Sure. So I'm Gavin Slemp. I'm a senior lecturer in the Centre for Wellbeing Science in the Melbourne Graduate School of Education at the University of Melbourne. I've been there since 2013. It was formerly the Centre for Positive Psychology, although they had a name change about a year or so ago.
No.
Yeah. So my work there, I do a range of different things. I do teaching. I do a lot of teaching there. I teach at the undergraduate level. I teach at the postgraduate level as well. So we teach in wellbeing. Our most popular subject at the undergraduate level is called Wellbeing, Motivation and Performance. And then we also teach master's programs around wellbeing as well. So we have the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology. We run that as well. So that's a little bit of my teaching. I do research as well. So my research obviously centers on the workplace. My background is in organizational psychology. So I studied the Doctor of Organizational Psychology at Monash. Graduated around 9 or 10 years ago now. And that's when I got interested in doing research. Part of my doctoral thesis was on work motivation. I was obviously interested in the area. Its relationship with well-being, and then I've continued doing research on it since then. So that was about a decade ago, and so now I've continued doing that sort of work now.
So it seems like you've been doing research on work motivation for a very long time, and you're still continuing on. And you said you got interested in the topic, while you were studying. How did you get that inspiration to pursue this kind of research, because it's very specific?
Yes. Well, I was always interested in how people function at work. And I think that's what drew me to study organizational psychology. So organizational psychology is a branch of psychology, like clinical psychology, health psychology, and so on.
Yeah.
And it's focused on how people function best at work, how to make work more enjoyable, how to help people feel more engaged and less burned out in their work, organizational culture, all these sort of things come into organizational psychology. And I did a lot of reading. I had to find a topic to do research on as a student back then. Work motivation, I came from the general motivation literature.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of reading around motivation generally. So sport, in school, and a lot of parallels existed in the workplace context as well. So that's when I started, applying these different concepts and theories to the workplace to do research around that. Particularly looking about how to foster high quality types of motivation, and then how that relates with well-being in the workplace.
That's very interesting. And we'll be talking about that in the interview bit of this conversation. And I'm excited because our team is also really excited about this topic. And I feel like after a couple of years of, pandemic, working from home, not being able to get interaction with your colleagues, and a lot of people changing career, great resignation, all that factors will probably be touched on today. And I'm excited that we're talking about that. But before we do that, we always do a fun thing. We call it Have You Met Gavin? Because we want to let the audience get to know you a bit better. Ourselves want to get to know you a bit better. And we want to get some recommendations from you on 5 topics. Are you ready?
Okay.
Yeah. I know you read a lot. So what would be a book recommendation from you?
Oh, I do read a lot. I tend not to read much non-fiction these days. So I'm busy I tend not to read much fiction these days because I do a lot of non-fiction reading with textbooks and so on. So what sort of recommendation do you want? Do you want a non-fiction recommendation, textbook, or probably not very exciting? Or do you like a fiction of novel?
I think anything that would spark interest in people. So maybe one fiction and one non-fiction.
Okay.
Yeah.
So non-fiction, my colleague wrote a book on job crafting, which we may touch on. It's called Personalization at Work.
Okay.
Rob Baker, he has a TED Talk if people are interested. So that's a topic that I also study because it's related to motivation at work.
Yeah.
So it's a very good book, very practical.
Okay.
So I highly recommend that one.
Yeah.
In terms of fiction, it's been a while since I've actually read a fiction book, but some that I did really enjoy that I couldn't put down were The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I really enjoyed.
Oh, yeah. I've heard so much about that. Haven't read it, though.
Yeah. It was quite a while back when I read that one, probably about a decade ago now.
Yeah.
But it was a very good book. I ended up reading it.
Was that made into a movie at one point?
Yeah, 2 movies, actually.
Two movies, okay.
Yeah, they have a Swedish version of it. The author was Swedish, I think.
Okay.
So they have a Swedish version of the movie and then
Very
an English
interesting.
version of the movie.
Yeah.
And both of them are very good. So
Yeah.
I highly recommend those. And they have a trilogy, actually.
Oh, you kind of answered the next question, which is about a movie. But besides that, would you recommend any other movie?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I could recommend a lot of different movies.
Yeah,
I
go
love
for it.
my favorite movies are probably from the 1980s, probably showing my age now, because that was when I was a kid. So I love Star Wars, obviously.
Oh, we all do.
Yeah. The original trilogy, I love that.
Yeah.
Back to the Future, I love that trilogy. Indiana Jones, all these types of ones. So those are probably movies that most people have seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Classics.
I do love those movies. I watch them over and over and over again.
Yeah. Well, they're classics and, can never go wrong. So agree with you.
Yeah.
All right. We definitely have to ask this question. What's your favorite podcast?
Oh, my favorite podcast. Well, I do a lot of, and I think because I work in well-being, I listen to podcasts which have got nothing to do with well-being. So I quite enjoy true crime podcasts.
Right. Which is your favorite true crime podcast?
I listen to one called Case File, which does a lot of Australian cases. They do a lot of, and the amount of research that they get on these cases and the information I'm always amazed by how much they can get and how much I can learn about these different cases and detective work, all that sort of stuff. I just find fascinating. So I do a lot of listening to those, particularly while I'm exercising or going jogging or something like that.
Yeah, very interesting.
Another one that's probably a bit more positive is Conversations podcast on the ABC.
Okay.
Yeah, Conversations.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
I was like, it has nothing to do with well-being, true crimes. Okay, very interesting. But again, interest, right?
Yeah.
It shows that you're interested in different things. So
yeah.
that's fun. And what about a role model or a famous role model of yours?
Famous role model. Yes, this is a difficult one. I would have to say someone like David Attenborough. If I had to pick someone who's famous. Amazing. He's 96 years old now, and he's still. I think he's still doing.
He's like a gun. He doesn't stop.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't know how to stop, I think.
Yeah. And I hope he doesn't stop. He's just amazing. Yeah.
Same.
I love his documentaries.
His voice.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yes.
I know.
Yeah. So I think the way he can pull you in and get you interested about animals and nature and so I really like.
Actually, it's really good for your well-being as well, right? Because when you watch these documentaries, I don't know, there's just that effect of getting in the zone or zoning in or zoning out at the same time.
Yeah,
that's really just therapeutic.
Yes, I really find it is. Certainly personally, the literature. Well, it's not my research area, but the literature seems to show a relationship between getting exposed to nature or being in nature and
Yeah.
well-being. And certainly I feel better after watching these documentaries. I find them very engaging and seeing all these amazing places that I want to go one day.
Yeah. Amazing. I think we've already touched on that in this podcast series as well about, the relationship between nature and well-being. It will probably come up before this episode or after, I'm not sure. But yes, you're right. It's a really great way to just improve your well-being while actually getting some exercise in. And we know how important that is to be in nature and, doing all this immersive experience. That's not in front of a screen.
Yes.
Great. And finally, we want to know about a course you've attended. Given that you are also teaching, this might be a bit interesting. So if you don't have a course you've attended, maybe a course you've taught?
So a course I was trying to think of a course I've attended. So
maybe both.
I don't think I've done anything recently. I mean, the probably the most recent one was probably 5 years ago. I did a brief course in computer programming because I think it would help me with my research. A lot of our statistics that we do, we have to know something about computer programming, even though I don't think I know a great deal. So, that was probably the most recent one I did. The ones that we teach obviously are more about well-being. So well-being, motivation, performance, our most popular undergraduate subject. And we teach a range of subjects in the well-being area at the master's and undergraduate level.
Yeah, interesting. So thank you for the recommendations and for sharing about your background, your interest, and we've got to know you a bit better, Gavin, and now we are ready to take on some of the really tough questions.
Okay.
We're here for the tough questions today. So the topic of the podcast, as we've mentioned, again, is well-being. We really want to help people improve their well-being in this series of podcasts. But of course, each person has a really different take on well-being. So what does well-being mean to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think my view of well-being comes from the scientific or psychological literature. And I must say, even in the literature, a lot of people don't agree exactly on what well-being is, but a lot of people do hold the view that it is multidimensional, which means it involves multiple different things. Yep. So I guess we could think about it like the weather. So the weather, if I were to ask you, what's the weather outside? And you said it's sunny. Yeah. Well, that would give me some information, but it wouldn't give me a full picture because obviously it can be sunny on a very cold day.
Yeah.
It can be very windy, all that sort of thing. So, you need to have a multiple different indicators. And I think that's where the literature is sort of going. And so the two main ideas about well-being, if we think about it like that, are that there's what's called the hedonic perspective, and that's more about pleasure and pain. So as long as we're experiencing pleasure and the relative absence of pain, then we're experiencing well-being from that perspective.
Yeah.
That one's got a little bit of negative baggage to it because, it's a lot of people criticize it because it's not very long lasting. It's very difficult to have a sense of pleasure and stay there and keep it. You might not necessarily have a sense of growth from that type of well-being. And I guess the big drawback is that it assumes that all painful experiences are bad when we can learn and grow from negative, painful experiences as well. Yeah. So there's the second view of well-being, which is what's referred to as the eudaimonic perspective. Comes from a lot of the work of Aristotle, an ancient philosopher. But that's more about, cultivating a sense of meaning and a sense of growth and a sense of purpose in life. So I like to use the analogy of why do people climb the world's highest mountains? So think about Mount Everest. It's actually very dangerous to do. Yeah. You could try and climb it, but you're risking your life. Obviously, a certain percentage of people climb Mount Everest and never come back, or they might get frostbite. They might lose limbs, lose friends, all these types of things. So I guess why do they do it? And if you read the books of mountaineers, a lot of them aren't sort of happy stories. They're full of these sort of terrible stories.
Okay.
So it might not be a sense of pleasure.
Yeah.
That might be a little part of it, but a lot of it's about ambition or a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, goals about the future, a sense of growth, development, this sort of thing. Yeah. That's more in line with the second view of well-being. Doesn't have to be pleasurable to have that type of well-being. So yeah, it's people sort of talk about it as feeling good, which is the functioning, or the first one, and then functioning well, which is the second one. Yeah. So having both or a combination of those is my view of well-being. It's a very long answer to a question. So
no, but that's interesting, because I think some of the guests before you have mentioned both views as well, and I think like to have a more elaborate discussion about the two views might help people that don't really have a background in well-being, and especially for everyday people. The word well-being gets thrown around very easily, and we don't necessarily understand. For myself, I don't study, well-being, and whenever I have this kind of discussion, I'm like, that is very interesting, because sometimes you just get told you gotta be well and stay well. What does that actually mean? And sometimes it might actually kind of trip you along the way, because you're like, oh, I'm not feeling well. Does that mean I don't have any well-being? Might get confusing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the limitation of that first one. It's the hedonic perspective. It's impossible to experience that happiness or pleasure or whatever it is, to have those happy feelings and just stay that way.
Yeah.
People go in and out of that sort of so, and when you're going through a tough time, you could still be learning something. You could still be growing, and that could lead to future well-being. So I think you really need both perspectives.
Yeah, totally. I really like that, because that reminds me of a book that I'm reading currently called Lost Connections by Johann Hari. Have you read it?
No, I haven't read that.
Yeah, okay, great. So I have the chance to explain it. Okay, so what's going on at the very beginning of the book is the author said, because the book is about depression, he mentioned the fact that sometimes when you feel something that's wrong, it's not necessarily negative, even though it feels negative at the time, because it's actually redirecting you. And like you were saying, when you're going through tough times or when you're going through difficult things, it actually helps you to improve on your well-being in the future. So I think like that really adds to the literature and all the research that people are doing nowadays, especially because it's such a taboo topic, talking about, depression, anxiety, and all the, bad things when it comes to well-being. And you mentioned a couple of things that people get wrong, some of the misconceptions about well-being. What are some of the other ones that you've noticed as well, besides those ones?
That's a good question. So the misconceptions of well-being, I think the big one, and it relates to motivation, is that, money is a very big driver of well-being. The literature is very nuanced in this area, but, certainly money does matter. And it helps us, buy freedoms and that sort of thing. But I think people perhaps overestimate the impact that it has on well-being. And if we spend our lives sort of pursuing money or trying to be wealthy at the expense of other things, such as finding a career that we really enjoy or that we want to do, that can have detrimental consequences down the future. And, it often does. I have a colleague who does a lot of coaching, and he'll be speaking with people who are very successful, CEOs or people who are very senior in their organization. Their kids are in private schools, they've got a very expensive mortgage. And they get to their midlife, and they sort of have a crisis, because they realize this is not what I wanted to do, and now I'm stuck here, because I can't. My kids are obviously got to go to these schools. I have this expensive mortgage. What do I do? And so he helps them navigate out of that situation. But a lot of that comes from having the wrong goals at the outset. So I think a lot of the motivation literature talks about. We'll probably get onto this a bit later, but finding about what you're interested in and what you enjoy. Focusing on that.
Very interesting.
I think that's more important, more sustainable. So I guess that's one of the big misconceptions. Another misconception, which I'm not sure really is a misconception anymore, but it certainly was for quite a long time, was just how people talked about well-being. A lot of people talked about well-being as the absence of negative psychological states, such as depression, anxiety, stress, burnout, these types of things. And yes, those things are unpleasant to experience, but there's more to life than just not having those, know. So that's why the positive psychology movement came about. So it's more about trying to cultivate the presence of positive things in life. So having a sense of meaning and purpose, having, goals for the future, having people we care about, around us and feeling connected with other people, all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's sort of moving in that direction now.
Yeah. Yeah, that hits really close to home. It's actually the first few chapters of the book I just mentioned. He talks about the exact same thing you just talked about. So I find that to be very interesting. And I feel like there were like 9 different causes of depression that was mentioned. I don't remember them all, but they seem to be all related to some of the misconceptions that people have. And today we're actually talking about work.
Yeah.
So that's the topic of interest for you. So I know this part you get really sparked up and talk about like all the research and work you've done. So let's start with the basic. How do you define work motivation?
Yeah. So work motivation, I mean, a lot of people think about work motivation in terms of the amount of motivation that you have. So you're either very motivated to do something or you're not very motivated to do something. And sort of they think about it by that, on that spectrum, by degree, I suppose.
Yeah.
I view it a little bit differently. And this comes from the literature that I study, and it's more about the quality of the motivation rather than the amount of motivation. So instead of asking how motivated are you, it's more about asking why are you motivated to do what you're doing. And so you can be motivated to do something for different reasons. If we think about work, you could be motivated for purely what's referred to as a purely internal reason. So you just go to work because you're drawn to the work. You find it enjoyable.
Yeah.
You find it interesting. You're passionate about it, or you perhaps find some sort of value in it that you think you're contributing, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
They're more internal reasons because the motivation's coming from within us.
Yeah.
Or you could have what's referred to as an external type or an extrinsic type of, my apologies, of an extrinsic type of motivation.
We're excited.
Yeah.
It's okay. Yeah.
Did you need to cut that out or? You're right. All right. So you can have what's referred to as an extrinsic type of motivation. And, that's different because that's about an external factor in the environment, perhaps, that is pushing us to, or creating that source of motivation. So it might be some sort of reward, like a financial incentive or a high salary or something like this. Or it could be fear of punishment, fear of shame, these types of things as well.
Right.
The difference between the two types of motivation is that the external forms of motivation, where you're relying on some sort of external contingency out there in the environment, the motivation tends to disappear once that external factor goes away.
Yeah.
And so that's an issue. It's less sustainable.
Yeah.
It's less enjoyable as well. So the more intrinsic, what's referred to as intrinsic motivation or internal forms of motivation, where you're just doing something because you love it.
Yeah.
That's much more sustainable, much more autonomous, volitional, and tends to lead to better outcomes in terms of well-being and so on.
Okay. That's very interesting. How about a little bit of both? Because for some people it's like that, right? I've got a lot of friends who talk about their work and, why they show up at work. And it's kind of like a little bit of both. It's not like they entirely love what they're doing, but they enjoy certain aspects of it. Plus, they get good money to, support themselves and their family. So would that be a good way to kind of go about it? And would that be sustainable as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think extrinsic motivation gets picked on quite a lot. And because it is less optimal than the intrinsic types, but you're never going to be intrinsically motivated to do everything.
Yeah.
There's always some parts of the job that we don't enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think, the external, fully extrinsic type of motivation comes in really handy then, because it can just get us, or it can get us through those activities, whatever they are.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. So you're never going to be fully intrinsically motivated to do everything.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it's what's referred to as internalization. So your type of motivation can start as fully extrinsic, but then once we engage in the behavior or engage in the work or whatever the activity is, we can start to find enjoyment and value in it that we didn't see before. And so the motivation starts to internalize and becomes more internal over time.
Interesting.
An example of this is I like to do running.
Okay.
And it was about 20 years ago probably that I started running. But I started running because I felt a little bit guilty. I saw my friends doing running.
Okay.
I saw them going to the gym, and I started to feel guilty.
Yeah.
So it was a sort of external type of motivation, that guilt or internal pressure that I put on myself. So that got me into running.
Yeah.
then I'd run, I'd go out jogging, I'd see occasionally a beautiful sunset, or, you'd see the nice autumn leaves, or you just get out there in the fresh air. So I really started to find enjoyment in running itself.
Yeah.
And so over time, I actually got really into running. I started to feel my fitness start to enhance over time. And then, eventually I started to run marathons and this type of thing as well. So, so that's the process of internalization. Motivation can start as fully external, but then internalize to become more internal over time.
Yeah, that is very interesting. What a happy accident for you. Like hopefully, I mean, I don't know if about everybody else, but like hopefully we can all find sort of similar happy accidents like that. Because who would say at a dinner party, oh, I just, randomly fell into fitness because I felt guilty like you. And now I've stuck to it. Very rare, actually. And when you said you internalize it, it's kind of like, can we do that? Can we all do that? That'll be so good. Because, we all find it so hard.
Yeah.
Just pick up our bag or just, put on our shoes, go out. So, if everyone could kind of do that, that'll be really good. But then again, it depends on each person, right?
Exactly.
Because, again,
and a lot on the environment.
Yeah, well-being is like you said earlier, it's different for each person, and it's not always about like the good side of things. So I guess we internalize differently is kind of my interpretation here, because for you is running, for other people it might be something else.
That's right. Yes. And different activities will be valuable to different people. Absolutely. And the environment matters a lot, I think. So if you've got someone, and I often see this with personal trainers, they'll be screaming at someone, come on. And, they're probably just starting doing exercise. I feel like that's probably the wrong approach, because, it's not going to cultivate that sense of enjoyment. It's just going to make it really painful. I think in those early stages, you should be helping people enjoy the exercise. And then through that, it might internalize, hopefully. But it might not happen.
I don't know, but my friend actually enjoys being yelled at. She came back from the gym. She was like, I got yelled at today and I was so pumped. And I was like, what? Come again? Okay. So, it's different for each person, right? Like she likes to be yelled at. Exactly. I don't. So I don't go to the gym, but then
no, I don't. I don't. No,
it depends on each person.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
motivation.
It does. I think, when I was getting into running, I gave myself permission in those early days to just walk occasionally.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So we stray a little bit from work. Let's go back to work motivation here. I think that's a really good example. And now let's talk about it in the context of work, because in the work environment, it can be a little bit, like it's different, because it's not like you choose to do it. Sometimes there are work activities that you don't get to choose to do. And so how can we relate work motivation with our well-being then? Because, work is very different for each person. This is like a very customized thing, and I think one size will not fit all. But if you look at the big picture, how can we sort of relate these two aspects of our life?
Yeah. So, I mean, the key learning from the literature, the area that I study, is that it's very important to have the right type of motivation. I mean, it's not going to be the whole job, but if you can find some sort of career, something about your job that you enjoy, and try and cultivate that and pursue it for those reasons rather than the external reasons, that's going to lead to better outcomes. It tends, when we experience that intrinsic motivation, that intrinsic drive to do something because we enjoy it, or because we value it, perhaps, it tends to be less of a chore. So it's much less associated with things like burnout, and the fully extrinsic types of motivation. They are much more associated with burnout, because work starts to feel like a chore. We're not really necessarily enjoying it, so we're doing it for this external factor in the environment, whether it's a salary or bonus or some other pressure that we might be experiencing. There are a lot of different things that can push people in different directions. I guess that's the first thing. If you're already in a career, and you can't find any sort of intrinsic enjoyment in what you're doing, then I'd probably start to question whether you're in the right career, and maybe consider pursuing alternatives if it's something that you can do. If it's something that you can't, another area, I spoke of the book earlier, referred to as job crafting. this is about shaping or molding a job that it's so that it is in line with your intrinsic interests and values and this type of thing.
Right.
That might be an option, although the degree to which people can use that in different jobs depends on a range of factors like autonomy and this sort of thing. That's an option. We'll probably get onto that later, I suppose. But I think those are really important things. There was some interesting research from the Gallup organization, and they look at they do a little bit of work on engagement, but motivation is obviously a big part of engagement as well. And if we're doing work because we're enjoying it, we can work much longer hours and not feel burned out, as opposed to when we're just doing work for other reasons.
Yeah.
We can work much shorter hours but feel burned out.
Yeah.
Because it feels like work.
Well, it is work. But
that's right.
But yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Does it feel like work? Because I remember like a long time ago when I first started my career, I talked to my manager at the time, who's amazing. She said, you have to kind of find that in you. Like, what do you enjoy doing? And I think some people refer to it as flow.
Yes.
So you get into the flow of things really easily, and you know that's exactly what you're enjoying doing. And it's not just because it looks good on paper, or it's not because your peer judge you for, doing like important or, like really nice work. And it's, like you said, very external factors.
Yeah.
Whereas if you really enjoy what you're doing and you forget about it, and then, time just goes by so quickly, and then that there you go, that's what you're actually enjoying doing. And the motivation is very much intrinsic.
Yes. And a flow experience. So that's a heavily studied topic in the literature as well.
Yeah.
So to have that sense of flow, and this is where you kind of feel completely absorbed in what you're doing. So time just sort of flies by, and you didn't realize that 4 or 5 hours have just disappeared.
Yeah.
Intrinsic motivation is a part of that, and so that'll get us into the activity. In the first place, and then we might experience that sense of flow. Very good for health and well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And because you do so much research in this area, I think there's a concept called occupational well-being. Mm-hmm. And everyone goes to work, everyone works in one way or another. Even students, they do their kind of work. How would you kind of define occupational well-being for the general public who might have not heard of this word before?
Yeah, I view it quite similar to the general well-being that I spoke of earlier. So you have the hedonic view, which is more about feeling good, and then the eudaimonic view, which is more about positive functioning, having goals, having a purpose, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I just sort of take that perspective and bring it to the workplace. Do you feel good in the workplace? Do you have that sense of enjoyment, positive emotions, all this sort of stuff when you go to work? But also, do you have that sense of purpose, that sense of contribution that you're giving back? You're having a sense of accomplishment, perhaps. You're having people that you're connected with who you care about. They care about you. A sense of meaning in what you're doing. All these sorts of things matter as well. So I think it's very, very similar. You might have broader well-being, but then there's workplace well-being. Yeah.
It's kind of like a miniature version of it, but all the aspects are kind of the same.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. So how about we pick on one aspect and kind of, dive deep into that. You talk about purpose, and this word has been mentioned quite a few times. To people that are feeling a bit disengaged, this might mean that they're maybe lacking purpose.
Perhaps, yeah.
Maybe.
Some of them, it might be for a variety of reasons. A lot of people are disengaged, not necessarily because of their own choices. It could be a whole range of things. It can be, the leader makes a huge difference in the workplace.
Yeah.
The person that we're reporting to.
Yeah.
In fact, the Gallup organization, I'm not sure if you've heard of them. They do a lot of public opinion polling, all that sort of stuff. They do surveys worldwide, looking into work engagement.
Yeah.
they say that they can predict about 70% of someone's or a people's engagement based on asking questions about the leader. Is the leader supporting
dangerous
the worker?
territory.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to be interviewed like that on live television, for example, because you might get into the frame of answering these questions without actually thinking, oh, my job's on the line. That's also tricky. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
So for those that are struggling, let's just kind of take into this context, because I think our questions are pretty much framed around, engagement, disengagement. But I think it would be more realistic for our listeners to kind of envision, like you mentioned, the leader is very important. And then again, we work differently. Each job is very specific. It's different for everybody to kind of tackle their task day to day. Work motivation comes, like you said, similar to how you look at why you go to work and, like why is it important internally and externally. So given all of those factors, for someone who's struggling to find work motivation, could be anybody, could be any circumstance, how could you help that person to first take the first step towards, maybe feeling better or improving their occupational well-being?
Yeah. I'd want to find out why they're not finding the motivation. So we refer to that in the literature as a state of amotivation. And that's where you don't have extrinsic motivation, you don't have intrinsic motivation, you've got nothing.
Oh, dangerous.
Well, this tends to be much more highly associated with things like, depression and all the negative things.
Yeah.
I would want to find out why. And it can be for different reasons that people are in that state.
Yeah.
So one, it might be because they're just burned out. They've got too much work and they've sort of given up or whatever it might be. Another reason is because they're just not enjoying. They don't find any value or enjoyment at all in what they're doing, and they've checked out. Another reason is because they might not feel competent enough to do what they need to do, which is a very unpleasant experience. If you feel sort of out of your depth, or that perceived incompetence, that I can't do what I need to do, or I'm not sure what I should be doing. Quite an unpleasant experience. And that can create that sense of amotivation. So I'd want to find out why.
Yeah.
I think once you have a sense of knowing that, then you might have different options available to you. Yeah, if it's just because you're not finding any enjoyment or something like that, I'd say job crafting could help.
Yeah.
It might not be the panacea. There's a lot of other factors that are involved.
Yeah.
If it's because you're not feeling competent, then I would ask questions about how can you increase your competence? Is there development opportunities? Can you be mentored? Can you be coached? All of these things I'd probably ask.
Yeah. Actually, there's a really interesting thing that happened recently to my friend who found a job at a very big company, and it's like her dream job, and she walked into it really excited, and it's been a couple of months now. I think it's been 3 months, and I know that she's a really competent person because I've worked with her before, I've heard other people giving her feedback, but she walked into this job getting completely overwhelmed, and when she mentioned the job, she was saying, I feel really just incompetent.
Yeah.
And I was a bit shocked and taken aback by that, because I know that she is competent, and it feels like maybe she's just overwhelmed because there's just too much for her to do.
Yeah. That can happen.
Yeah, and I try to tell her that, but she doesn't buy it. So again, this is like back to kind of the solution mode. How can a person dealing with something like that help themselves?
I mean, it could be that she doesn't. There's too much for her to do. It could be that she's not in the right role, so there's a bit of a misfit between her skills and competencies and what's required in the job, or maybe the job's not what she anticipated it would be, which commonly happens.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure if I can give personalized advice.
This is just a context. Like, it's something that happened, and it's very close to the topic. So I was like, I'm intrigued. How can this person help themselves in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, finding out why she has that experience is important, I think. So is it because there is a mismatch, or is it because maybe you need to do some extra development?
Yeah.
Or is it perhaps that you're unsupported in the organization? I think these are important to know because they could create different avenues to try and solve it. If you're unsupported, then maybe perhaps, you could try and ask for support or maybe be mentored or coached or whatever it is. I think those are possibilities, but it really depends.
Yeah. It's very personalized again, but good to have some options.
Yes.
So maybe she's listening to this and she'll be like, okay, I'll try that. Hopefully she will. I don't know.
I mean, a lot of people also, before we move on, a lot of people have those experiences. They feel out of their depth. And it's not because they are incompetent. In fact, a lot of the time, the most competent people tend to have those experiences.
Yes.
So, that's not uncommon at all. In fact, there's a whole word for it that emerged out of the literature, and it's referred to as imposter syndrome. And it used to be because a lot of people who were studying advanced sort of degrees, like doctoral degrees or PhDs, they would see everyone else around them and think, oh my God, I'm not up to speed. I'm just, these people are way further ahead than I am.
Oh, that's exactly what she said.
Right.
That's exactly what she said. Yes. She was saying that. She was saying like she works with like all of these people that have way more experience than she does. And, they've held like really higher up roles before. And I'm like, okay, that can sound really intimidating, but it doesn't mean that you're not competent. So there you go. That's exactly what happened.
You've got to start somewhere, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
So it sounds like maybe she's putting too much pressure on herself. But I mean, you have to work up to get that experience.
Yeah.
And
Thank you. Yeah. I will tell her right after this. I'll be calling her up and just transcribing what was happening here.
Sure.
That's really helpful. And I think a lot of people actually go through that. And the other end of the spectrum, I think, is when someone is overqualified. And so they don't have that kind of work motivation because...
Well, yes, that is another thing that can lead to that state of amotivation.
Yeah.
They're just bored. The work is no longer engaging. They don't find it challenging.
Yeah.
And they're done with it. Yeah. So yes, that can happen as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So for those people, how can they help themselves?
Well, I would be looking about how I can get a sense of challenge in what I'm doing. If there's nowhere else for you to go in that job, can you maybe change jobs without changing careers, perhaps? That might give you that sense of challenge.
Yeah.
Or maybe career change. Obviously, there's big learning curves there because you'll have to learn an entire new different set of skills. Not an option for most people because most people have life commitments that keep them in a particular career or a particular job.
True.
But I guess aiming high, trying to, set goals about how to, and find ways to get there.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things will generally create a sense of challenge. And that's important, I think, because if we have challenge, then we have that sense of learning, that sense of growth. That's very important for enhancing our perceived competence.
Yeah.
Our perceived competence. I'd be exploring all those options as well.
Yeah, that's good advice. And I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from this because, again, there are two sides of the spectrum. While some people feel overwhelmed, maybe going through imposter syndrome, other people might get so bored because, they're way overqualified and they've been doing the same thing for a long time without advancement opportunity maybe.
Yeah.
And this might be really helpful for them.
Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't have to be advancement as in you get promoted, but it could be that you move sideways and then have to learn something new.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. All those
Good
options.
Point. Yeah. That's a good point. So we've talked about individuals and how they can deal with these circumstances themselves. How about organizations? What can organizations do to actually support them? Because, we're all humans and we need support because occupational well-being is a part of our, overall well-being. And while I know that, work should be left at work, it does not necessarily mean that organizations can just turn their head away and be like, you take care of your own well-being because work is such a big part of our lives. It's at least 8 hours a day in a work week. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a difficult one. There's so many factors that go into well-being, I think, in the workplace. So things like organizational culture, there's also leadership is a huge factor as well. Do people feel supported? Do people feel that they have a sense of direction in what they're doing? I think all of these things are hugely important for motivation, for engagement, for well-being at work. To have that sort of positive organizational culture where people feel that they're contributing to something perhaps, or that, people have a sense of meaning and purpose and, they have goals, all this sort of thing. or they feel, at least when they're going to work, that they're in a safe environment, it's supportive, these types of experiences. I think that's the responsibility of the organization.
Yeah.
To put all those things in place.
Yeah.
And then, people still might not reach a state of well-being, and that's because there's lots of other things that go into well-being as well. People have personal lives, obviously, people go through divorce, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
All of it matters for well-being. And then there's not much an organization can do about that other than support be there to support the employee. So I think that's the role of the organization. And then if they put all the conditions right, if they get all the conditions right, people feel supported, they have a sense of autonomy, they have a sense of choice in what they're doing, then intrinsic motivation, those internal types of motivation, work engagement, flow perhaps, these types of things tend to emerge. So I think the role of the organization is to provide those circumstances to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely challenging, like you said, even though all of the stuff that you mentioned, very important, all organizations should apply that. But I guess for some organizations, they just don't know where to start because there's so much going with just, having a work culture in the first place.
Yes.
Because I think, especially after the Great Resignation, right, we noticed that, like all these organizations, they claim to have really good work culture, but what they didn't anticipate was, the burnout rate during and after the pandemic, things like that. And so I think it's also a matter of being really agile with how you shape your organizational culture.
Yeah.
And a big part of this is the employees, because they build the organizational culture with the leaders. It just doesn't just exist.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we do have to do all of these steps, but what would be some of the baby steps? Maybe some leaders are listening to this podcast and they're like, I want to get some ideas from Gavin. How can they make baby steps towards that?
Yeah. So, I study leadership and its related relationship with motivation, a particular style of leadership, and it came from the motivation literature, but it's what's known as autonomy supportive leadership, or leadership that helps people satisfy their basic needs. I'll get onto those in a little bit, but the autonomy supportive leadership is that style of leadership where people feel supported, you're there to nurture them and help them, but they also have a sense of choice and you encourage them to take initiative and a sense of ownership over their work. And so when that happens, people tend to volitionally engage in their work a bit more, and they start to feel that those internal types of motivation. If you can't give a sense of choice about something, then providing a rationale about why is really important, because then it makes people understand then, okay, I don't have a sense of choice here, but I know why. That's really important. Or just giving people a rationale about why what they're doing is important. A lot of people don't even have that. So they go to work and they don't really have that sense of, what am I doing, or why does it even matter? That sort of stuff. So I think those sorts of things are really important. And then, if you want to increase motivation, to try and create those conditions, and it's about increasing the right type of motivation, not just any type of motivation. So giving people a sense of choice, all that sort of stuff, and trying to avoid just using, those external factors like rewards, incentives, punishment. Some people use, to motivate people to do the things that we want them to do. I think that's the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah.
Not to say that any rewards are always bad. They're not, but
it's difficult because, you can't not have reward, but how do you reward people correctly? I feel like that could be a bit tricky as well, because sometimes perhaps organizations go, this is your reward once you've accomplished X, Y, and Z. But then once the employee has completed, all of those things, they've ticked all the boxes, they feel so burnt out, they don't even want the reward in the first place. So I find that to be a very tricky balance, especially when it's such a day-to-day thing. It's not like, oh, the reward is there to motivate you and that's all that we'll do. That's enough. I don't think it is ever enough. And I feel like it is a very tricky thing for leaders, and leadership is, always constantly evolving, especially in the, virtual workplace as well. So I guess it's a matter of learning, right? You have to keep learning little things every single day and just not forget about the fact that workers, people, they're humans. So yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
And, I think those rewards and incentives, they might get motivation in the short term.
Yes.
To do something. It's hard to sustain that. I think people tend to want bigger and bigger rewards.
Yeah.
But it's also, you can use them effectively. I mean, if they're sort of given to the employee as a sense of feedback, that they did a really good job on something and here's a reward, that sort of thing, that can be useful. That can help build a sense of competence.
Yeah.
It's difficult to do. I mean, it's difficult to get right. And there's a lot of people doing research on this at the moment. But so I think it's a fairly nuanced area. Yeah. But just using rewards to try and get people to do what we want. Is generally ineffective in terms of fostering high quality types of motivation. Yeah. The other things that leaders can do to try and foster good types of motivation is trying to help foster a sense of competence in the employees. So helping them understand, how to perform the role better, helping them understand how to develop, perhaps mentoring, coaching, offering feedback that's constructive and helps them develop and advance their career. That's really important stuff that a leader should be doing. Yeah. The other part of it is fostering a sense of what's referred to as relatedness, that people feel connected with other people at work, and they feel that sense of, support from their leader. Yeah. But also that the leader's helping them nurture relationships with other people around them as much as possible. I mean, some organizations are quite small. But I mean, that is an important role of the leader. So the extent to which the leader can satisfy those three things, autonomy, competence, and then relatedness, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely trickier nowadays with, remote teams because, how do you relate to a person on the screen? And most of the time nowadays, because everyone's so burnt out from, all the Zoom fatigue, they don't even want to turn the cameras on. And so again, that's like a question of, okay, how is the leader going to motivate everyone to actually stay engaged in the conversations and get to know their colleague in the first place? Because as remote jobs go, it can be really easy to just, finish the work or do the task without even thinking about your team. Yeah. And I feel like that's one of the challenges that leaders can face.
Yes. It's certainly more challenging in that environment.
Yeah.
You tend to lose those organic conversations that can, you could provide feedback or something like that. Yeah. Everything is much more structured in the online world. I think you have to set up a meeting to talk to someone or, a lot of this stuff happens. Yeah. It's not to say that you couldn't work within that space, just might be a bit more challenging, I would say.
Yeah. I think scheduling in social time would be very helpful. Like I've noticed that's what my team's doing, especially for the team members that are on the same time zone. They have like once a week social catch up, which is very good for them. And I feel like that motivates me back to like also, have social catch ups with other colleagues.
Yes.
And we've talked about, like this is important for employee engagement, but I just thought of leaders. How about leaders themselves? Because they need to be motivated as well, right? While they're trying to motivate their team, how can they get motivated themselves?
I mean, a lot of it's the same thing. I mean, usually the leader reports to somebody.
And, what about the person or the people that do not report to anybody?
Okay. Like a CEO or something? Yeah,
maybe someone who's a CEO is listening to the podcast. Well, they might be keen to find out.
I mean, usually the CEO is accountable to the board, I suppose. But I mean, we've actually done research on this as well. Do CEOs or very senior leaders have that perception of control or autonomy from either the executive team or the board, to which they're accountable at the end of the day? And a lot of them don't feel that sense of autonomy, which is really interesting. But the one thing that a leader can do, or someone in that sort of position can do, is that usually the CEO is a part of the board, so they can go in and actually have conversations with people that influence the way they are managed in the first place. Yeah. So they might ask for, I need more autonomy to do X, Y, and Z, or whatever it may. It probably sounds a lot different like that when the actual conversation takes place. Yeah. But they can have those types of conversations to try and create the conditions themselves that they need, because they have that sort of autonomy, they have that power in the first place. Even people who are lower down, obviously not at the executive level or the CEO level, they can do a little bit of that as well. And we've studied that. So if people don't feel they have autonomy in the workplace, they might be able to strike up a conversation with the person who's managing them. Yeah. and ask for, is it all right if I, have more decision-making autonomy to do X, Y, and Z, or can I do this, this, and this?
Yeah.
They can start to have those conversations to try and create more of that autonomy supportive approach in the leader.
Yeah.
And that does happen as well.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about, like trying to get work motivation, and it just kind of reminds me, the whole conversation has been about staying at your job, right? But then there's also another story where you've done everything you could. You've tried all the tips that Gavin gave you, but then it doesn't work. So you move on. So, that normally how it goes, I guess.
Yeah. If you tried everything and you can't stand it. Then I think exploring other options. Yeah.
But then, it's always good to remind people that, you try everything you can in the context of what you have, but then, at the end of the day, you always have a choice.
Yeah.
And you do what's best for your well-being, because we're talking about well-being, right? We don't want people to burn themselves out just for a job, especially because life's much more than just work.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
I guess the beauty of the current climate is that the unemployment rate is very low. There's a demand for workers basically everywhere. So people have a lot more choice in what they do.
Yeah.
That probably won't last forever, but it's a good time at the moment.
Yeah. Interesting time. So I think we've covered everything in terms of the research and the questions about like the theoretical side of thing. Now, what we would love to do is talk about a practice, so get really practical. And in this context, we want to ask for your opinion about your personal practice or habit. How do you motivate yourself to work?
So for me, this is another research area of mine. So, but I try and practice what I do research on.
Yeah,
but
good to know.
Thank you. And then, so there's, I spoke of Rob Baker in his book about job crafting.
Yeah.
Job crafting is a research interest of mine because it is related to motivation.
Yeah.
Job crafting is about shaping the job in such a way that it's more in line with our interests, our passions, our values, our own needs, and this type of thing. So when we do this, it tends to create better outcomes for the employee. So job crafting is related to well-being and engagement, intrinsic motivation, this type of thing. So there are 3 different types of job crafting. So there's what's referred to as task crafting, where you shape or change or influence the actual tasks that make up the job.
Yeah.
There's what's referred to as relational crafting. And this is where you try and change the nature of the relationships that you have at work.
Yep.
Maybe get to meet new people or expand your social circle in the workplace. Are possibilities. And then there's what's referred to as cognitive crafting. And this is how we think about the job.
Okay.
So a lot of people go to work and they don't actually think about the impact that they have, or the positive contribution that they're making either to the organization or to perhaps society, depending on the nature of the job. So these are types of things that you can do to try and create more sort of intrinsic motivation to do the job.
Yeah.
And lead to more engagement and that type of thing. Yeah. So job crafting is something that I try and practice. Yeah.
Yeah. But then you've talked about the research. How about the actual practice of it? How do you do that in practice?
Okay. So that's a good question. It looks very different in all types of jobs, but my jobs, my job as an academic, I do 40% teaching.
Yep.
40% research.
Yep.
20% is what's referred to as leadership and service. So we might, sit on committees, all this sort of stuff. Do podcasts. But for me, it's about just trying to create all those different elements more enjoyable.
Yeah.
So an example of where I've done this is, my colleague and I were having a very organic discussion just, by the water cooler at work, pre-COVID, obviously. So we were having a discussion about the subjects that we offer, and we thought, we don't really have anything where we teach about, sport or performance or, we touch on these things in our subjects, but we don't have a subject that's dedicated to that.
Yeah.
And then we thought, okay, well, let's introduce one.
Okay.
And so that's what we did. We wrote a subject, developed a curriculum, and then we rested a subject that wasn't doing as well. It was still popular, but it was less engaging to teach it.
Yeah.
And so we brought in this new subject. It's actually done really well at the university. It's quite popular. It gets really good feedback from students.
Yeah.
And it's probably because we're actually motivated and enjoy teaching it. It's about stuff we're interested in.
Yeah.
So I guess that's an example of, we introduced something. It wasn't needed, but we did it because it struck an interest with us.
Yeah.
And because of that, it helped us do it well.
Yeah.
And I think that's what job crafting tends to look like. A lot of people are a little bit worried, especially leaders, when they, try and encourage people to do job crafting, because they might think, it's the employee going a bit rogue.
Yeah.
What if they just go off and do their own thing?
Yeah.
Well, it's not really what's involved usually. I mean, usually job crafting is, it's related to performance, or positively related performance, which means the more job crafting you do, the better your performance tends to be.
Yeah.
And that's probably a reason, because, that subject more popular from the university's perspective. So that helps the university. It was more engaging for us to teach it. So that helps us as staff, and the students probably learned more because we were teaching it better.
Yeah.
So it's sort of something that helps ticks all boxes usually. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's an example. Yeah. The way they discovered job crafting was not in an academic profession. It was actually with hospital cleaners.
Oh.
This is going back about 25 years ago now in Michigan in the United States.
Yeah. What happened?
So they were doing research with hospital cleaners.
Yeah.
And they were asking them about how they find meaning in their job.
Yeah.
And they were in, this one room. There was this man. He was in a coma. He'd been hit by a car, I think, while he was out jogging. So he was sitting in his room, well, laying in a bed in the room, I should say, in a coma. And they noticed that there was this hospital cleaner, changing the pictures on the walls.
Oh.
They were interested. So they started just observing this person, and the person would put up a picture, a painting, whatever it was.
Okay.
Have a look at it and then bring it down, pick up another one, put up, another painting, and have a look to see what it looked like. And, eventually found the right painting and then left it. And they struck up a conversation, and, like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And they were like, the person who was doing it said, well, I'm a hospital cleaner, and it's my job to take care of the patients in here. So, take the person sitting here, for example, in the coma, or lying down in the coma. When he wakes up, I want him to see beautiful things when he wakes up.
Yeah.
And so that's what they were doing to help that. So they brought these pictures in from home to do that.
Wow.
That's an example of job craft.
That's dedication.
It is.
Yeah.
But that's what it looks like, and it's adding these extra things into the role. It's not really considered, it's not a part of the job description.
Yeah.
But it helps create that nice feeling when you go to work. It helps create that positive drive to do the job. Other things they were doing, if they saw that a patient, for example, not that patient, but any patient hadn't had a visitor for a while, they might go up and try and keep them company because they knew it would help the healing process, for example. These are hospital cleaners, it's not part of their job usually to do that. So they would do all these types of things, and it tended to be associated with their engagement. So the people who were doing more of these behaviors tend to be much higher in work engagement than the ones who weren't. The ones who just viewed it as a job, I go there, I clean, I start at this time, I end at this time, and then I leave. And they were much less engaged.
Yeah. I think that sounds to apply to all professions. And I know you gave your example in the academics context. There's the, example from the hospital back in the day. But I guess we can all learn from this and, improve on our work motivation by, applying job crafting when we can. I guess it applies to all kinds of jobs, all kinds of people who are working. How about the time? How do we make time for it, and how often should we do it?
Well, I guess that's the beauty of job crafting. It's not necessarily something you have to add into your job to find a time to do. It's not like, for example, mindfulness or meditation, or what a lot of people do, which does have a lot of positive benefits, I must say. That's something that you have to find the time to do. You might set aside half an hour or 40 minutes or however long to try and do it. Job crafting is more something that's naturally integrated into the job itself. So it's about making those subtle changes to make your job better.
Yeah.
So the difficulty with job crafting is finding the opportunity and knowing where to start and knowing what to do. Yeah. So that can take a little bit of exploratory work. Yeah. And it's not obvious a lot of the time. So we often, if we're doing workshops and that sort of thing, we'll spend some time to, get get people to like write down what their job is at the moment. So all the things that make up their job.
Yeah.
And then you would generally ask them, what would your ideal job, assuming you're staying in this job, what would the ideal job look like? And they would write down all those things.
Yeah.
Okay, how do we get from A to B?
Yeah.
What are some short-term goals that you could implement immediately?
Yeah.
And usually these aren't very big. It might be just trying to meet new people.
Yeah.
Increase the social circle, or whatever it might be. Think about the impact that we're having at work.
Yeah.
These are things that don't require big changes at all, can be done pretty much straight away. Or it could be more long-term stuff that does require planning as well.
Yeah.
So both of them, I think, are really important. Yeah. So I spoke about the subject that we introduced. That was something that we had to put that through the university committee and had to go through academic board.
It sounded simple. It's not.
Yeah. Well, it took time.
Yeah.
So it's not something that we could just go in and do straight away. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of it does take planning, those sorts of changes. But I mean, the other stuff like thinking about the job.
Yeah.
Thinking about how we're impacting people or the organization that, for whom we're working or for which we're working for. These are stuff that we can pretty much do straight away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's important to bear in mind, like you said, your example, even though you told a story in 5 minutes, it didn't take 5 minutes to accomplish. And so for anyone who wants to improve on their work motivation, they also need to kind of keep that in mind. Yep, you might find something that you really want to try and do, and that might make you feel better and more engaged at work. But that might mean a lot of time, lots of commitment, and it takes a while to actually make it happen. But then once you've accomplished that, your work engagement might increase, and that's the outcome that we want.
Yeah. I mean, and sometimes it's not easy. It's not easy to make the change.
Yeah.
It might involve extra work or extra effort or whatever it is. But and sometimes it might not work. You might try it and think, no, that didn't work. I won't do that again.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but at least now and you can try other things. So I guess that exploratory, those exploratory behaviors are really important to try and find what works for people. Yeah.
Yeah, but at least people have to test it out, because otherwise they won't know.
Yeah.
And I think another very important thing is when they feel that tingling sense of, motivation or idea, they need to act upon it. Otherwise, it might fade away. They might forget about it. And then the work motivation that could have been gained sort of disappears. And it's such a shame, because I see that happening a lot. Like maybe there would be a colleague of yours that mentioned, oh, I have this great idea. And then you're like, that's so great, act upon it. And like, I'll do it. And then, they go home, they forget about it. And then 5 years later, they're like, oh, I wish I had done that.
Yeah.
That would have made me so much more engaged. So I think like little things add up as well. And it is a good practice, but how you go about it is very important, because it's nice to talk about, but if you don't, find the right way to go about it, it can be such a shame of a loss.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Strike while the iron's hot, as they say.
There you go.
Yeah. And I think that does play a role. You've got to try and take the opportunities when they're there.
Yeah.
And really try and find what those are.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. And for people that are interested in, improving their work motivation, great. Now they have the idea of job crafting. What would they combine it with then? Maybe something smaller? Would there be any other practice they can combine with on a day-to-day basis so that they feel more motivated?
I guess something that it is related to would be strengths use. So if you think about what are your strengths, either strengths of character or strengths as in areas of talent or skill or whatever it is. Strengths are defined in slightly different ways. But if you just think about that, where are areas in which you are strong?
Yeah.
How could you focus more on those?
Yeah.
Because when we play to what we're good at, I suppose, and there's some research on this as well, tend to be better functioning at work, and we tend to be higher in engagement. The Gallup organization actually does. They have their own survey about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're quite big on this. They say playing to your strengths is something that will help foster engagement, and people that don't have the opportunity to do what they're best at, during their work day, they tend to be lower in engagement. And they have some data to show that.
Yeah.
But strengths use is related to job crafting, because it might be related to, task crafting.
Yeah.
You try and influence the job in such a way that you can deploy more of your strengths at work.
Yeah.
Or, you know, if your strengths are in relationships or building relationships or people, you know, that sort of thing, it could be more of the relational aspects of the job as well.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's probably something that I would consider combining it with. Yeah. It's very much related to strengths. Yeah.
That sounds like the baby steps we need, right? Because you said task crafting and then it will be job crafting. So,
yeah,
you know, the small step and then the big steps.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
Yeah, sure.
Great.
So if your listeners are interested, there are surveys out there where they can try and measure their strengths. The Gallup is an option. I think you have to pay to do that one though. It's not expensive. It's about $10 or $15 per person or something like that.
Yeah. I feel like I have done it and it doesn't cost anything. I can't remember exactly.
Well, there's another one.
Okay.
Which is referred to as the
might be another one then.
Yeah. The VIA, or the Values in Action Survey of Signature Strengths.
Yeah.
This one came out of the University of Pennsylvania, although I think they have now a separate organization called the VIA Institute. And if they just Google that, they can go, and it's about 130 questions or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's free, but it's strengths of character. So it might say your strengths they'll give you a top 5.
Yeah.
You know, depending on how you respond to the survey, they might say, okay, your strengths are in kindness, you know, critical thinking, curiosity, or a passion for learning, this sorts of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how can you use more of those things on the job?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good step. Because, you know, I think a lot of people have not tried this before at all. Even though like it's such an important thing nowadays, and I've heard so many people talk about it. You got to know your strength, know your, you know, personality type.
Yeah.
A lot of people still don't know. So, you know, at least an action item after today, once they've listened to this, if they haven't already, find out about their strengths and start from there, because that might help them with their work motivation.
Yes, absolutely. I think it would definitely help. Yeah, I mean, we're usually strong in an area for a reason, because we're more interested in it or we're passionate about it.
Yeah.
So it tends to be much more related to that intrinsic motivation, engagement, flow, these types of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so that's our practice section. We've been practical. I think that's very helpful. It's been helpful for me. Hopefully it's helpful for our listeners. And now we have this section where we got our audience to submit some questions about the same topic that we've just been talking about. Maybe there are some things we haven't covered and it's, you know, personalized to some people. I find these questions to be particularly interesting.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you do fine. I think one of the most interesting question is, I think everyone talks about this. It's not a new question. How should I motivate myself to work when I don't feel like it?
Yeah, well, that's a tough question.
Very tough.
I would say that goes back to what we were saying about that state of amotivation.
Yeah.
If you're just not motivated to do the job, I would be asking why. Why don't I want to do it?
Yeah.
Is it because you're burned out? You've got too much? Is it because you feel that you don't have the right skills, or is it just a mismatch between, you know, what you are interested in and the job, or what you're skilled at? What the job requires, those sorts of things. I'd be finding that out.
Yeah.
And then once you know, or once you have an idea, then you can try and use different strategies to try and get out of it. If it's you know, if you feel out of your depth or lacking in competence and that you need some sort of development, then perhaps you can pursue something.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to go back to why.
Yeah. Okay, but I'm in front of my computer now. I've got a list of things to do. I don't want to do any of it. And I'm gonna sit down and think about what you just said. I'm gonna like try to list, you know, like the reasons why I might be feeling like I don't want to do it.
Okay.
I have found a solution, but I think this solution cannot be applied straight away today.
Yeah.
Now I have this list of tasks to do. What's the first step that I should do then?
So, okay, so speaking about the tasks rather than the job.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's just say I have a list of tasks, but I just don't want to do any of that.
Okay. Well, there's always going to be some tasks that you don't enjoy doing, or you're just not motivated to do it all. You know, I have them. Everyone has them.
Yep.
It's part of any job usually. Yep. Sometimes we just have to suck it up and do it. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
That's when the extrinsic types of motivation come in and say, well, if I don't do this, there's going to be some sort of consequence. Either someone else is going to have to do it and I would feel bad.
Yeah.
So at least I'm saving that person time. So you can think about it like that, perhaps. Or, you know, maybe, you know, you just sometimes have to find a way to do it. So, you know, it's going to help you in the end. Maybe it's going to build a positive image of you in the workplace. So these might be different motivators, that extrinsic motivators that might get you through those tasks. There might be opportunities to delegate some parts of your work, if you have that capacity. Perhaps not everyone has that. A lot of people don't. And then the people you work for probably wouldn't enjoy working for you that much because you're giving them all the crappy work.
Yeah.
But so I guess there's a range of options. But sometimes I think we just have to just dig in and do it.
Well, I think what I find to be helpful, just, because it's like a really good question from the audience, and what I find helpful for me, maybe this will help them, is in the context of virtual office. I feel like sometimes you're in front of your computer and you're like, oh, another list of tasks I have. What I would normally try to have that sense of connection, maybe this is because of a remote work condition, maybe. I'm not sure what exactly happened with the person that asked the question. But you could grab a colleague and be like, hey, should we do a virtual office? So you can do that boring task while chatting about your life.
Yeah.
Or chatting about your work, even like just, an area that you want to do some brainstorming on. And I found that to be very helpful, at least for me. I didn't want to do any of that, but, I saw my colleague and I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to do some work now. So, yeah.
Well, in some ways, I guess that's a form of job crafting. You're shaping the job so it helps work for you better.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. I would be exploring if there is a way to craft this in such a way that it actually makes that task more enjoyable.
Yeah.
That would be the first thing I would probably be doing. If I can't do that, then sometimes you just have to do it.
Yeah. Another question I find to be also very good is, for some people, their day-to-day task is the exact same.
Yeah.
And this question goes, are there any tips on how to maintain my motivation, especially if I'm doing the same task over and over again for days?
Yeah, that's a harder one. So we do have those occupations that, they're more rigid. They're less autonomous, or there's less autonomy or scope to do what we, or to have that freedom to do the things we want to do.
Yeah.
That certainly does exist. You still can do job crafting even in the most routinized or rigid job.
Yeah.
And I'd say this is where that cognitive part comes in. So it's changing the way we think about the job. There's people who do research on how to make work more playful. So that maybe they, try and create competitions somehow, assuming there's no safety protocols that are going to be breached or whatever. But yeah, I mean, this has actually been studied, people who do sort of create those sort of internal games to try and make it more competitive and have that sort of inject that sort of enjoyment into the job.
Yeah.
And that tends to be related to work engagement. So the more people can do that, the better.
Yeah.
If that's not an option, I'd say thinking about why you're doing. There's always a reason you're doing it. People aren't just asking you to do it and paying you to do it for no reason whatsoever. So it always has some sort of impact and some sort of benefit. So if they trace that impact, where does it benefit people? And start to think about those. And it might help them increase, I guess, the meaning associated with the work a bit more.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of I think the pandemic sort of helped show us this. A lot of the most important jobs to keep society going were the ones that, you don't go to university for 8 years to study, but they're crucial. So keep working in a supermarket, truck driver, logistics, all this sort of stuff are really important to keep society going.
Yeah.
And, if you're just thinking about the tasks, you're going to miss that picture a little bit.
Yeah.
So thinking about what does it do? What is my role? How do I contribute?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that reminded me. This reminds me of the time I went on a tram, and the tram driver decided upon himself that he would be our tour guide of the day.
Okay, yeah.
So, tram driver, same route. So he was like, how do I make this job more fun for me? I was born to be a travel agent, but I couldn't make it happen. So now I'm going to do it on this tram. So I don't remember the exact route, but he was basically giving everyone a historical tour of what happens on this route.
Yeah.
Basically, like, in this year, this happened on this street, like that's town hall, whatever. And initially I didn't hear because I was on my headphones, but then when I had to listen for the stop, I found that to be hilarious.
Yeah.
And I found him to be brilliant.
Yeah.
Because he's enjoying his day so much.
That's right. Yeah.
Much more than people that have maybe, higher paying jobs or, jobs that seem more fun on the surface.
Yeah.
So I think that's job crafting.
That is job crafting.
There
absolutely. Yeah. I have seen that before as well.
Yeah.
I've seen train drivers, not driving, but what do you call it? What are the train driving? I guess air driving. Going past the MCG.
Okay.
Talking about the games that are going to be on.
Oh, really?
And all this sort of stuff. But it was funny because, you're sitting in the carriage.
Yeah.
Everyone's there either on their phone or their book. But then when this happened, everyone sort of looked up. And people were smiling. So it sort of created that sense of connection between people in the train as well. It was really nice.
Yeah. So perhaps, the person who asked this question can kind of look at their job in the same way. It is repetitive, but how can I make it fun for other people that might benefit from what I'm doing?
Yes.
I think that'll be a nice way to approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
It's always nice when something like that happens.
I think that's a fun note to end this.
Okay.
Yeah. And finally, before we let you go, we have the final section. We call it open mic. I've talked to you about it earlier. And I'm sure besides work motivation, besides your current research, there must be some other things that you're passionate about. This is your platform. Our audience is listening. Go for it.
Oh, yeah. It's difficult. I've spent so much time working. I think that, I'm most passionate about my job. But if I have to pick stuff that's not to do with work, I'd guess it would be travel. I love watching movies. I spoke about Star Wars, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I really enjoy those.
Yep.
And then I guess and exercise and running. I ran I think 11 marathons now. I haven't done one in a while since my son was born. I can't run as much these days, but I do. I am passionate about that stuff as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, there you go. Marathons, something for people to try.
Yeah,
maybe they'll get into it.
I haven't done one since 2016 was the last time. So I want to get back. It's a good reason to travel.
Yeah.
Try and find a marathon that is in an interesting city or a city you haven't explored, and then run around the city. It's a nice way to see a city.
Yeah, but you had other reasons to, other things to be passionate about, like your son. That's also another thing to be passionate about.
Course,
parenting, right?
Parenting, my wife and son, family, friends, all of that. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, there you go. So different passions, different areas, but good to know that you're very passionate about work, which is why you're the right person to talk about work motivation today. And thank you so much for joining us here in the studio. We're really excited and have been learning a lot, and I hope our audience have.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here. So thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights Podcast, produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website at we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.